Catherine of Aragon is one of the most recognized names in the history of the English monarchy. She is the Queen Henry VIII pushed aside, the first wife in the famous lineup of six, the woman whose refusal to accept a divorce set off one of the most dramatic political and religious upheavals in European history. But the standard version of the story tends to skip over something that anyone who lived through it would have noticed immediately. Henry VIII was not a faithful husband from the beginning. Long before Anne Boleyn arrived and changed everything, Catherine was already navigating a marriage in which her husband openly kept mistresses. She dealt with it year after year, and she dealt with it in ways that tell us more about her than any portrait or official record ever could. So today, we are going to take a close look at exactly how Catherine of Aragon handled Henry's infidelities, who those women were, what Catherine actually did, and what happened when she finally ran out of room to maneuver. To understand what Catherine was working with, you have to understand where she came from. She was born on December 16, 1485, the youngest daughter of King Ferdinand II of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. These were two of the most formidable rulers of the 15th century. Her mother Isabella led military campaigns, and her political decisions reshaped Western Europe. Growing up in that household, Catherine received an exceptionally thorough education for a woman of her era. She studied Latin, history, philosophy, and theology. She spoke multiple languages. Historian Garrett Mattingly, whose biography of Catherine is still considered by many scholars the definitive account of her life, wrote that she was trained from childhood to understand that being royal was about duty, discipline, and the capacity to function with composure under conditions that would break most people. What followed would test that training directly. Catherine was sent to England in 1501 at the age of 15 to marry Arthur, Prince of Wales. The wedding took place in November of that year. 5 months later, Arthur was dead, most likely of sweating sickness. Catherine was 16 years old, widowed in a foreign country, with no money and no clear path forward. She would spend the next 7 years in genuine financial hardship, waiting while England and Spain negotiated over what to do with her. During this period, she held the position of ambassador of the Aragonese crown to England, which made her the first known female ambassador in European history. Whether that distinction brought her much comfort while she was petitioning for money to pay her household is a fair question. What ended the waiting was Henry. In 1509, when the 18-year-old prince inherited the throne as Henry VIII, he chose to marry his brother's widow. By most accounts, the early years of the marriage were not merely a diplomatic arrangement. Henry appeared genuinely infatuated. He was tall, athletic, and determined to present himself as a Renaissance king, and Catherine matched him intellectually. She had read widely, corresponded with Erasmus, and commissioned the scholar Juan Luis Vives to write a treatise on the education of women. Henry's biographers and contemporary observers noted how openly affectionate he was with her. He wore her initials on his jousting armor. He called her his queen and his jewel. The court was festive, showy, and young. Henry and Catherine appeared, by all external signs, to be a genuine partnership. But between 1510 and 1518, Catherine experienced at least 6 pregnancies. That number is essential to understanding everything that follows. The only child to survive to adulthood was Princess Mary, born in February 1516. The others, a stillborn daughter in 1510, a son named Prince Henry who lived 52 days in 1511, more stillbirths, and a daughter who did not survive in 1518, represented years of physical endurance and grief that Catherine bore largely in public. According to Britannica, between 1510 and 1518, Catherine gave birth to 6 children, including 2 sons, but all except Mary either were stillborn or died in early infancy. Henry was grief-stricken after each loss, by multiple contemporary accounts, but over time his sympathy gave way to impatience, and then to a private conviction that the problem was the marriage itself. He now had a theological theory to support that conviction, and he would use it later. It was against this backdrop that Elizabeth Blount entered the picture. She was known at court as Bessie Blount, and she arrived as one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting around 1513. when she was approximately 15 years old. According to Philippa Jones, author of The Other Tudors, Henry VIII's Mistresses and Bastards, Henry fell in love with Bessie Blount around 1514. She was everything he found compelling: young, beautiful, an accomplished dancer and musician, and completely accommodating of what he wanted. The affair was well enough known at court that references appear in correspondence from 1514 when Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, alluded to shared romantic interests in a letter to the king. This was not a secret. It just was not something that could be spoken of directly. Catherine's response, by all available evidence, was public silence. This was not weakness or ignorance. The expected conduct for a queen in 16th century Europe was to endure in silence. Royal mistresses were an established feature of European courts, and queens who made scenes about them made themselves look unstable. According to historic royal palaces, Catherine endured the king's affairs as many queens before her had done. She retained her composure, maintained her duties, and gave no public indication that she was affected. She had no good alternative. Accusing the king directly would have been useless, and possibly dangerous. The only available strategy was to behave as though her position was unassailable, which required acting as though nothing was happening. That strategy took a significant hit in June 1519, when Bessie Blount gave birth to a healthy boy. Henry acknowledged the child publicly and gave him the name Henry Fitzroy, a Norman French surname meaning son of the king. He would later elevate the boy to the dukedoms of Richmond and Somerset, titles that no acknowledged illegitimate child in England had received in living memory. According to historian Elizabeth Norton, author of Bessie Blount, The King's Mistress, the birth of Fitzroy encouraged Henry to put the blame for his lack of surviving sons squarely on Catherine, and to believe that a different wife might give him what he needed. He now had proof of his own fertility. The problem, from his point of view, was not him. This changed the calculation in a fundamental way. For years, Henry had tolerated the absence of a male heir because the next pregnancy might produce one. The birth of Fitzroy suggested that a different woman might produce one sooner. How Catherine responded to the birth of Fitzroy is a point that historians have debated carefully. Historian Garrett Mattingly, in his biography of Catherine, describes what he characterized as her extraordinary restraint during this period. What the sources agree on is that Catherine did not make a public scene, did not use the occasion to embarrass Henry, and continued to function as queen. After Fitzroy's birth, Bessie Blount left court entirely. This was standard protocol. A mistress who bore the king a child was given a decent exit. Within 3 years, Bessie was married to Gilbert Taleboys, a landowner of respectable lineage, and she moved into a new household at a safe distance from court. With Bessie gone, the next woman to become Henry's mistress was Mary Boleyn. Mary had come back from France and was married in 1520 to a courtier named William Carey, with Henry VIII in attendance at the wedding. The affair appears to have been ongoing from roughly 1521 to 1525. Mary Boleyn bore children during this period whose paternity Henry never officially claimed, though speculation circulated. Catherine's response followed the same pattern as before. She said nothing publicly, maintained her position, and behaved as protocol required. She had shown with Bessie Blount that she could endure this without breaking. She endured it again. What changed in 1522 was the arrival at court of Mary Boleyn's younger sister. Anne Boleyn came back from France as a lady-in-waiting to Catherine herself, and she was by all contemporary accounts a distinctive presence, sharp, fashionable, and entirely confident of her own appeal. For a while, there was nothing obviously different about Anne from Henry's previous interests. Catherine had watched him move on from women before. She had every reason to assume this pattern would repeat. One detail from this period has been preserved through accounts attributed to observers at court. During a card game, Anne happened to draw a king. Catherine, who was present, reportedly said, "My Lady Anne, you have good hap to stop at a king, but you are not like the others. You will have all or nothing." It is a remarkable sentence in its calm specificity. Catherine was not shouting or making accusations. She was noting, in public, that she had been paying close attention and had reached a conclusion. She had seen enough of Henry's behavior to recognize that Anne was after something different from what the other women had wanted. Unlike Bessie Blount, and unlike her own sister Mary, Anne Boleyn was not interested in being a mistress. She refused Henry's advances and held out for the possibility of marriage. Henry was not willing to give up. By around 1526, he had concluded that Anne was the woman he wanted to marry, which meant he needed to end his marriage to Catherine first. According to Ambassador Eustace Chapuis, the imperial representative to the English court, whose detailed dispatches to Holy Roman Emperor Charles V provide some of the most comprehensive records of this period, Catherine was not immediately aware that Henry was pursuing a formal annulment. When she did become aware of it, she wrote to her nephew Charles V, urging him to use his considerable political leverage on her behalf. Charles was in an exceptionally powerful position. His troops had sacked Rome in 1527, and Pope Clement VII was effectively under imperial influence. The Pope would not easily grant Henry an annulment, while Catherine's nephew held that kind of pressure over the papacy. In one letter, Catherine referred to Anne Boleyn as the great scandal of Christendom. It is one of the sharper things she is recorded as ever saying about Anne. In public, she maintained the same composure she had shown throughout. Historian Alison Weir, in The Six Wives of Henry VIII, notes that Catherine never publicly slandered Anne even after it became undeniable that Anne intended to take her place as queen. While Henry negotiated with Rome and pursued Anne more openly, Catherine continued to behave as though she was still his queen, because legally and in her own estimation she was. She still sat beside him at ceremonial occasions. She still appeared with him at court events, and according to Ambassador Chapuis, she continued doing something that Anne Boleyn found genuinely infuriating. She kept making Henry's shirts. This practice, more precisely embroidering the linens that Henry wore, was a traditional domestic role that queens performed for their husbands, and Catherine continued it throughout the annulment proceedings. Antonia Fraser in The Wives of Henry VIII records that Anne created one of her frequent angry outbursts when she discovered a servant carrying linens to the queen for this purpose. For Anne, it was an intolerable symbol of Catherine's continued claim to her position. For Catherine, it was probably precisely that, a statement. A queen makes her king's shirts. She was still queen. In June 1529, Henry's pursuit of an annulment resulted in a formal hearing at the legatine court at Black Friars in London, before two papal legates, Cardinal Wolsey and Cardinal Campeggio. Henry's argument rested on the biblical book of Leviticus, which states that a man shall not marry his brother's wife, and on his assertion that Catherine's marriage to Arthur had been consummated. Catherine had been insisting for years that her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, and that Leviticus therefore did not apply. Henry had received a specific papal dispensation before his marriage to Catherine, addressing this exact concern. He now argued that no dispensation could override divine law. It was a legal and theological dispute that had occupied scholars, ambassadors, and clerics for years. Catherine had her own plan for the hearing. On June 21, 1529, when her name was called, she did not take her seat. She walked directly toward the king, knelt at his feet, and refused to get up. Henry tried to raise her twice. She stayed on her knees. Before the assembled court and the two cardinals, she addressed Henry personally. According to the account recorded by George Cavendish, Wolsey's gentleman usher and biographer, she said, "Sir, I beseech you for all the loves that hath been between us, and for the love of God, let me have justice and right. Take of me some pity and compassion, for I am a poor woman and a stranger born out of your dominion. I have here no assured friend, and much less indifferent counsel. I flee to you as to the head of justice within this realm. Alas, sir, wherein have I offended you, or what occasion of displeasure have I designed against your will and pleasure?" She continued from there, insisting on the validity of her marriage and asking for the right to appeal directly to Rome. Henry, in front of a crowd plainly sympathetic to his wife, could not refuse. He agreed. Catherine rose, curtsied to the king, and walked out of the court. When called to return, she ignored the summons entirely and reportedly said, on, it makes no matter. for it is no impartial court for me. Therefore I will not tarry." She had used the hearing not as a legal proceeding to engage with, but as a public platform to put Henry in an impossible position. She had gotten what she came for, and left. The Black Friars hearing concluded without a verdict, as Campeggio delayed proceedings and eventually had the entire case recalled to Rome. Henry's patience ran out. Cardinal Wolsey fell from favor and died before he could be executed. By 1531, Henry had formally separated from Catherine and ordered her to leave the palace. She was to use the title Princess Dowager, the title of a deceased prince's widow, which was precisely the status his annulment argument was designed to assign her. She refused. She continued to sign every letter and every document with the words, "Catherine the Queen." Henry's response to her refusal was to progressively worsen her conditions. Her household was reduced. Her access to allies and correspondence was restricted. Most painfully, her daughter Mary was removed from her care and declared illegitimate under the new succession laws, which named Anne's daughter Elizabeth as heir. Catherine wrote letters arguing her case and expressing constant concern for Mary. Henry refused her requests to see her daughter. Both women were unwell, and both were being deliberately kept apart. According to historic royal palaces, Henry still forbade Mary from visiting her mother as Catherine's health deteriorated. Spanish allies begged the king to permit the visit. Some secured permission, others went to the castle behind his back. By May 1534, Catherine had been moved to Kimbolton Castle in Cambridgeshire, a cold and remote property that bore no resemblance to the conditions owed a Queen of England. Her health was failing, and she had not seen Henry in years. Chapuis continued reporting to Charles V with growing urgency. He received permission to visit Catherine at Kimbolton toward the end of 1535, spent 4 days there, and reported that she appeared to be improving slightly when he left. He returned to London to request better accommodations for her. He was still pursuing this when news reached him that she was dead. Catherine of Aragon died at Kimbolton Castle on January 7, 1536. She was 50 years old. The most widely accepted conclusion among medical historians is that she died of cancer. In the final days of December 1535, Catherine had written her last letter to Henry. It has survived and remains one of the most closely studied documents of the Tudor period. She wrote, "My most dear lord, king and husband, the hour of my death drawing on, the tender love I owe you forceth me, my case being such, to commend myself to you, and to put you in remembrance with a few words of the health and safeguard of your soul, which you ought to prefer before all worldly matters, and before the care and pampering of your body, for the which you have cast me into many calamities and yourself into many troubles. For my part, I pardon you everything, and I wish devoutly to pray God that he will pardon you also. For the rest, I commend unto you our daughter Mary, beseeching you to be a good father to her. Lastly, I make this vow, that mine eyes desire you above all things." She signed it, Catherine the Queen. She had not seen him in 5 years. She was dying alone in a castle she had not chosen, separated from her daughter, and her final recorded words expressed a wish to see him. Whether that reflects genuine feeling after everything he had done, or is the most controlled thing she ever wrote, is something historians continue to debate. Henry and Anne Boleyn reportedly wore yellow when news of Catherine's death reached court. Many English observers interpreted it as a sign of celebration. Henry announced that he was now free of the threat of war with the Emperor over Catherine's treatment. That new chapter lasted approximately 4 months. Anne Boleyn was arrested in April 1536 and executed in May on charges that most historians today consider fabricated. Henry Fitzroy, the son Henry had fathered with Bessie Blount and had considered as a possible heir, died of tuberculosis in July 1536 at the age of 17. The entire structure Henry had built on the ruins of his first marriage collapsed with notable speed. Catherine was buried at Peterborough Cathedral with the honors due to the Dowager Princess of Wales, the title she had refused to use while alive. Henry did not attend. He forbade Princess Mary from attending. The English public's mourning was extensive. She had remained popular throughout the years of her exile, and the crowds along the route of her funeral procession were not small. Looking back at how Catherine dealt with Henry's infidelities, what stands out is how consistent her approach was, and how deliberately chosen. In the cases of Bessie Blount and Mary Boleyn, she followed established protocol and endured in public silence. This was not passivity in any general sense. In 1513, when Henry was campaigning in France, Catherine served as Regent of England and organized the military response to a Scottish invasion. She delivered an address to English troops, supervised the defense of the kingdom, and sent Henry the blood-stained coat of the slain King James IV as proof of the English victory. She was entirely capable of decisive action. When it came to Henry's mistresses, she made a calculated decision that the correct response was silence and continuity, because that was what usually ended these situations. Anne Boleyn required a different calculation because Anne was not simply a mistress. She was a political opponent backed by a court faction and supported by Henry's genuine desire to replace Catherine entirely. The threat was legal and dynastic. Catherine's response to this different threat was to fight on every front available to her simultaneously. She used her nephew's political hold on the Pope as leverage. She used the English public's affection for her as quiet pressure on the court. She used the Black Friars' hearing as a stage to force Henry to grant her the right to appeal to Rome in front of witnesses, in terms he could not refuse. She rejected every compromise offered to her because every compromise required acknowledging, in some form, that her marriage had been invalid, which would have made her daughter Mary illegitimate. That she would not do. The consequences of her refusal were severe. She spent her final years isolated, in declining health, separated from her daughter. She died without seeing Henry again, and without receiving any acknowledgement that she had been anything other than an obstacle. But the refusal also produced an outcome that no one predicted. Henry's insistence on ending the marriage, combined with the papal refusal to grant the annulment while Catherine's nephew held political pressure over Rome, led Henry to break with the Catholic Church entirely and create the Church of England. The English Reformation, the dissolution of the monasteries, the reshaping of English religious life that continued for generations. All of it traces back, in one direct line, to Catherine's refusal to accept what Henry wanted. She was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. She had been raised to hold her position under pressure, and she held it until the very end.